Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished luminaries of academia and fellow scholars, a respected the pursuit of excellence in education transcends boundaries. And today, as we stand at the crossroads of innovation and tradition, we commence our national conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea, and Nation. Today, as we gather to explore the legacy of India's first Prime Minister, we are reminded of his words. Life is like a game of cards. The hand you dealt is determinism, the way you play it is freedom. It's my privilege to invite Dr. Suma Alexander, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of English, to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Respected Principal, Dr. Ranjit Matthew Abraham, Vice Principal, Dr. Anne Angeline Abraham, Mr. Amit David, Assistant Professor, Department of English, keynote speakers of the conference, Mr. Aakar Patel, Dr. Mukul Keshwan, delegates, faculty from various colleges, our former faculty, friends, well-wishers, dear colleagues, current and former students of the department, and everyone gathered here. The department is happy and privileged to host this three-day national conference on the topic Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea, and Nation from 21st to 23rd January 2025. This conference is a result of the concerted efforts of the staff and students of the department, bringing in original thinkers and reputed speakers on the various aspects of the topic, revisiting the founding principles and core values in our nation building, and to strike a note on the contemporary relevance of the topic. The department has conducted 3 national seminars on literary theory, ELT, and media studies, this being the 4th one, besides an international conference on Marxism. We also have instituted the Rodine Lecture Series and Golden Jubilee Lecture Series. We enjoy the privilege of having the best speakers in their respective areas to talk and interact with our students. Professor Laura Mangi, Professor Simon Bueling, Professor Akhil Bilgirani, Professor Raj Rao, Arundhati Roy, Professor Vinay Lai, to name a few. Let me move on to my duty to welcome the gathering present here. Our principal, Professor Dr. Ranjit Matthew Abraham, has always extended his cooperation and support to all such programs that foster a spirit of inquiry and critical thinking. A most hearty welcome to you, sir, who is here for the inaugural address. It's a matter of pride that the Vice Principal of the college, Professor Dr. Anne Angeline Abraham, is the senior faculty and former head of our department. She is here to offer felicitations. A most cordial welcome to dear Anne. Paucity of funds was the greatest issue we faced when it came to the conduct of the conference. It was a great relief to get the CSR funds released, that amounts to rupees 2 lakhs by Canara Bank, Mahavilkira. Let me take this opportunity to express our profound gratitude to Sabita ma'am, who was instrumental in for us in receiving this financial support. She is the chief manager of Canara Bank, Mahavilkira. Even in her absence, I welcome her to this program. I also extend a warm welcome to Mr. Amit David, conference coordinator, and appreciate the efforts of the coordinators, Mr. Premchand Emma and Amit Dev, both assistant professors of the department, for mobilizing the available resources and making this event happen, in spite of the many constraints that we had. We are indeed privileged to have Mr. Aakar Patel and Mr. Mukul Keshwan, who are our keynote speakers traveling all the way from Bangalore and Delhi to be with us here. A warm welcome to you, sirs, from the bottom of our hearts. And to all our delegates, paper presenters, participants, friends, well-wishers, and dear students who have contributed in every way possible for the conduct of this conference. A big thank you. And to everyone, thank you all for your presence. And I welcome you all once again and wish you all an enriching, worthwhile experience these 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I have the distinct honor of having our respected principal, Professor Dr. Ranjit Matthew Abraham, to inaugurate this conference and deliver the inaugural address.
Respected guests, Dr. Mukul Keshwan, Mr. Aakar Patel, Vice Principal Dr. Anne-Angeline Abraham, Head of the Department Dr. Suma Alexander, the conveners of this program, Professor Premchand and Amit David, faculty members from various parts of the state, delegates, and my dear students. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to be here this morning to inaugurate this national seminar, which is dedicated to Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister. He was a towering figure whose life and vision shaped the contours of modern India. Nehru was not just an individual, but an institution builder, a thinker, a writer, a leader, an economist who embodied the dreams and aspirations of a newly independent India. The dream and aspiration of Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, is evident from his Tryst with Destiny, which is a masterpiece of literature. He quotes like this: "Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, and when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. It is fitting, this solemn moment, we take the pleasure of dedication to the service of India and her people, and to the still larger cause of humanity." I think this tryst with destiny, it showcases the aspiration and vision which Nehru had for India. Nehru was a person of immense intellectual gifts. He was no ordinary politician, but represented the best traditions of Indian culture. It is no wonder that Mahatma Gandhiji nominated Jawaharlal Nehru as his successor to lead our nation. As we recollect on the contributions of Jawaharlal Nehru, what really impressed me is his contribution to education. If not for Jawaharlal Nehru, we would not have had such a wonderful educational system prevalent in our country. Today, our country can boast of one of the best institutions in the world, like the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Management, All India Institute of Medical Science, and the NEP, the National Education Policy introduced during his era, symbolizes his commitment to education. Similarly, his commitment to science and technology. Today, we have our ISRO, we have our CSIR, and I quote one of his statements: it is science that can solve the problems of hunger and poverty, of insanitation and illiteracy, of superstition and dreading custom and tradition. He strongly believed in science, in rationalism, in reason. He strongly believed in rationalism and in reasoning. He was a very vocal proponent of science. His contribution to economic development, I think, if not for Jawaharlal Nehru, India would not have laid its foundation for economic development. The public sector enterprises, the 5-year plans, the stress that he laid on industrial development, the stress that he gave for agricultural development, and the emphasis that was laid on heavy industries. And Jawaharlal Nehru developed, dreamt of an India that is self-reliant, where India could produce all that is required, all basic infrastructure required for development could be produced within our own country. I think whenever we talk about the contributions of Nehru, we'll have to recall the steel plants that he built. The Bhilai steel plant, the Rourkela steel plant, the Durgapur steel plant, without these steel plants, India would not have built a strong foundation on which Indian economic development could be based on. As far as agriculture is concerned, the contribution of Nehru towards agricultural development is evident from the dams that he built. The Hirakud Dam, the Bakranangal Dam, the Damodar Valley project, all these are clearly evident of the focus, the emphasis that he laid on agricultural development. And the main public sector enterprises like the Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited, the Oil and Natural Gas Commission. Whenever we talk of economic development, it is the foundation that this Prime Minister laid for our country that we were able to build upon. If not for Nehru, if not for his contribution to laying such a vibrant foundation for the economic development of our country. And whenever we recall a Prime Minister who occupied the office from 1947 to 1964, quite a long period. When he occupied the office, his office was not a bed of roses. We know the most important challenge that our Prime Minister faced during this period was the partition. And the issues arising from the partition, whether India should be one unified country or whether we should be two different countries based on our religion. Of course, in the beginning, though all our leaders wanted India to be one unified nation, but we know that even Nehru accepted the policy of a two-nation, where the nation will be divided based on religion. And India was a country that was mired in superstition. We know that Pakistan was independent in August 14, 1947, and we received our independence in August 15th, the midnight of August 15th. And in every issue, that is, when a prime minister occupies his office, we know there are very, very serious issues that were facing our country based on religious intolerance, the clashes between the Hindus and the Muslims, the issues related to partition. So these were all very important issues that our country had to face. But in spite of all this, we have a prime minister who was deeply enrooted on the philosophy of secularism. He believed that every religion, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, all should live in unity in diversity. Though he was able to accept every caste, every religion was accepted, and we have to live in peacefulness in our country. Jawaharlal Nehru was also a very vocal proponent of the non-alignment movement. I think still, even after around 70 years of independence, I think still we do not have a leader of his stature who was able to talk shoulder to shoulder with any leader of any developed country, be it the United Kingdom or the United States of America or the Soviet Union. He believed in the idea of India, the idea of a sovereign democratic republic, a modern India rooted in cultural heritage. I think the books that he have written, I think it is very apt, it is very fitting that the Department of English is organizing a seminar on Jawaharlal Nehru, the man, idea, and nation, because he has been a wonderful author. The books that he has written is they are, I think, books that have to be written, they have to be read by every student of literature. Discovery of India, recalling from the time of creation how India as a country evolved, the rich heritage, the rich culture of a country like India. Jawaharlal Nehru believed in rationality. He believed in inclusivity and humanism. So I think there is no other individual other than Mahatma Gandhi ji who occupies such an eminent position in our country. As an individual, I think Jawaharlal Nehru is a person who has to be celebrated, because this is one individual who has laid the foundation for the development, for the secularism, for every philosophy that India stands for. Rabindranath Tagore has scripted these words, and these words are very much fitting to the life of Jawaharlal Nehru. He put his thought this way: where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward into the ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. My father, let my country awake. It is this idea that Nehru, as a lawmaker and a politician, has been always seeking to impress on his own people and to the community of nations. I, as the principal of this college, I'm immensely happy and glad that the Department of English is organizing this seminar. I, as the principal, as the head of this institution, I very warmly welcome Dr. Mukul Keshavan and Mr. Aakar Patel to the Bishop Moore College, Mavelikara. I also I'm immensely happy and glad to see all the delegates, all the dignitaries who are here. I sincerely hope that you will have a thought-provoking session, critical analysis of the life of the life, idea, and the contributions of Jawaharlal Nehru, that you will be critically analyzing the merits and the demerits, the pros and the cons of the life of Nehru. On behalf of all those present here, I very happily declare this National Conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea and Nation open. I also take this opportunity to appreciate Mr. Premjit and Mr. Amit David for taking all the efforts, the pains to organize this seminar, for the efforts they have taken. I, being the principal, I also appreciate the efforts of the conveners and the Department of English, the leadership given by Dr. Suma Alexander for organizing this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished delegates, I now have the honor of inviting our Vice Principal and former Head of the Department of English, Professor Anne Angel Abraham, to offer the felicitation.
Respected Principal, Professor Dr. Ranjit Matthew Abraham, the guest speakers, Mr. Aakar Patel and Dr. Mugul Kesavan, the Head of the Department of English, Dr. Suma Alexander, conveners, Mr. Amit David and Mr. Premjit MR, my dear colleagues, delegates, and dear students. Welcome once again to Bishop Moore College and the National Conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea and Nation. As I stand here, I am overwhelmed to be at yet another conference conducted by the Department of English, Bishop Moore College. And I bring my greetings as the Vice Principal of this college, and I welcome you all to the college and to the department. As we stand here today, the college is celebrating its Diamond Jubilee. And to think that the department is adding on to the celebrations is a matter of honor as one of the conveners of the Jubilee celebrations. This Bishop Moore College was named after Edward Alfred Livingston Moore, a bishop who was selfless in his extreme. And we follow the name, and this, for the uninitiated, this college is under the management of the Church of South India and the Central Diocese. And we are a minority institution, but we are well placed in the NIRF ranking among the first 100 colleges consecutively for many years now, and we have been accredited by NAC and SAC and everything. So what I would like to say is that in spite of being in a tiny hamlet in the district of Alapura, our band of teachers and stakeholders and students are doing our very best to remember or bring our college to the forefront. So I'm very proud to say that we are doing our very best, and this conference is an offshoot of that effort in the national arena of educational institutions. And coming to my own very department, being the senior most member of the department, I am very happy to see that the legacy of the department is taken forward. Being the connecting link of the former teachers of the Department of English, which started off in 1967, to the present category of teachers who are here. I can look back and say that national conferences happened in the Department of English way back in 1983. I have the brochure to talk for it. It was a seminar on Shakespeare. And then came a seminar on poetry, which talked about poetry and Wordsworth in poetry. So that was long back. And then came the pre-degree delinking and all of that. And the second set of teachers came in. And we have had, as Suma, the head of the department, rightly pointed out, we had a session of seminars, and that is carried forward. And the department and the conveners, whenever we come together, it is for seminars that the department becomes active. And a big credit of that goes to Mr. Amit David and Mr. Premjit MR and to the other colleagues of my department who are doing a tremendous job, and to the students also. I'm saying they are the ones who are running behind everything, and whatever it is, the credit goes to them. I can see former students here. I can see my research scholars here. I can see students from other departments and other colleges here. To the speakers, we have teachers and faculty from other colleges in and around Mavelikara. And there are students from the Department of History and Political Science also here, as well as students from the Department of English. We have Professor Hari Krishnan here, former head of the Department of English of NSS College, Pandalam, and other senior faculty members and friends from other places who are here. I welcome you. Bhagalakshmi is here, and every one of you. Being part of Bishamu College, it is an honor that you are here, and I hope this conference will bring us deliberations, and you would go out with something. You can take back something from the deliberations that will go on for 3 days in this college. So I would like to welcome you all, and I hope you have a very good time, because the speakers are eminent people who are well versed in their fields of expertise, and I hope you would all have a very good time. And all those who are joining here online, hello and welcome to this program, and I wish you all the very best, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I invite Mr. Amit David, Assistant Professor, Department of English and convener of the National Conference, to propose the word of thanks.
Respected members of the dais, dear friends, I'm very happy and elated to stand here watching all you sitting before me. Now, we are at a point of time when maybe we won't be able to say this is the best of the times, this is the worst of the times, things like that. We have been going through the kind of political scenario around the world, the kind of social economic crisis that's happening around us, around the world, amidst us, where we come to a point where we have to think about, do we have alternatives? Do we have should we have new perspectives to move forward? Should we take on, understand new ways in which we can look into society and the world? And that's where it is at this point where, as a literature department, as a humanities department, we place ourselves, trying to engage with all these things, trying to understand what's happening around us. And all these things would happen a couple of years ago when we began to think about critically looking into literature, the 2011 first national seminar that we did. From then onwards, we had other seminars where we were again trying to seriously engage with all these kind of things. And in 2019, we had our conference on Marxism, and our thoughts about this conference would stem naturally from all those ideas that we had discussed earlier there. What's the alternative kind of politics that we have to think? What's the alternative kind of perspectives that we have to take to look into society? And it's at this point that we, and particularly Premjit, had a thought about talking about Nehru. And we know the context in which Nehru is being debated in India, the kind of notions and perspectives that has been built around him. So, talking and thinking about Nehru is a very crucial moment in history and a point of time. And it is there we try to contextualize ourselves, place ourselves. And with that note, let me press on to my duty to make a note of thanks to this inaugural function. Our principal had been very supportive from the beginning itself when we placed this idea of the seminar before him. we had many constraints at the beginning itself. We had no idea where our funding and all those kind of things would happen. They would be asking us all those kind of things from the beginning, but we had, that kind of support from him, which always told us that okay, you should go forward, move forward, think about it, and that's how finally we are here now. So thank you, Dr. Abraham, for all the support and also for inaugurating this seminar. Thank you, sir. I thank Dr. Anne Angel Abraham, Vice Principal of the college. Again, with the principal, had been looking into our seminar, critically intervening and posting questions wherever we needed to think about many things, and that had in fact given us ideas about what are the things that we have to keep in mind and do when we are organizing a seminar like this. And thank you, Dr. Anne Angel Abraham, for being part of this inaugural function. Thank you. Our head of the department, Dr. Suma Alexander, teacher, had been actually the kind of pillar whom had completely supported us with all the kind of things that we required to do this seminar. So we had to pool all our resources, students, teachers, colleagues, non-teaching staff, and everything. And the teacher had been a great advisor to us, supporting us throughout the way. Thank you, ma'am, for being here for an obligation. And here, today also, actually, the manager of the Canara Bank, Mrs. Savita, was also thought to be here, but she had an emergency. And it was only because at this point the Canara Bank came with a kind of support that ultimately we could very wonderfully organize these things in the way that we are having it now. On her absence itself, I thank Canara Bank and Mr. Savita for supporting our program. And she was willing to be here, but in an absence, I thank her. Let me thank our plenary speakers. Today we will be listening to Aakar Patel, and tomorrow morning we will be listening to Dr. Mupi Kesh. They came yesterday evening, and today morning they are here in the campus. I thank both of them to be part of our inaugural function. Thank you. I find a lot of familiar faces here. Many of our friends, teachers from other departments, students from other departments, members of the general public who had in fact inquired and asked us the ways to participate in the program, and all our teaching staff from other departments, non-teaching staff, and everyone. I thank all of you for being here at this conference and being part of this inaugural function. Thank you all. And finally, not to be like, it's not something to be mentioned, but as a convener of the conference, we are very thankful to all my colleagues and the canaries of our department, our students. No, they had done a wonderful back job for us, which actually had tremendously relieved us of many things. All the years we have reached a kind of a template where organizing a conference like this has become like a cakewalk for any convener who decides to do something like that. So our teachers, our colleagues, our students have so much given us so much kind of a support, which made this seminar possible, which made this program possible. I thank them also on the behalf of the Department of English, on the behalf of the conveners for making this possible. Thank you, everyone. So welcoming all you once again. Let's move on to the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, we have come to the end of the gathering session. I'd once again like to thank everyone present on the dais. With this, we'll be moving on to the plenary. For the first plenary session, we have with us Mr. Aakar Patel, journalist, author, editor, and chair of Amnesty International in India. A prolific author, he has to be credited books including Our Hindu Rashtra and Price of Modi Years. He authored a translation of Sadat Hassan Manto's Urdu non-fiction, Why I Write. I invite you, sir, for today's session.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Principal and Vice Principal Abraham, to HOD Alexander, the professors Ranjit and Amit, to Siddharth and Manzoor, who picked us up this morning. Thank you to all of you for making time. Thank you to Canada Bank. This is the first time that I have state sponsorship for the things I am about to say. I have a presentation with about a dozen slides. And Mukul, if you want, you can turn the chair around if you want to see. Okay. And
Conference concept moves that so can you just wait for 2 minutes.
I invite Mr. Amit David for the conference statement.
Sorry for the bit of confusion. But before beginning this, we should also like to state the purpose of us coming together and debating about all these things to happen in next 3 days. As I said in the beginning, all these things stem from our earlier discussions that we had been trying to engage the society. It's from this perspective that we began to think about Nehru, particularly in the context when we are having his 60th death anniversary. I read from our concept note and kind of paper where we had thought about what are the things that we had in mind when we are trying to deliberate about Nehru in this conference. Now, Nehru as a legacy guru, as a freedom fighter, a politician, an administrator, a statesman, a writer, a philosopher, he was marked by a kind of unwavering faith in a middle path that we always talk about. The idea of the middle way or reconciliation, his character expresses itself in almost all spheres of his engagements, from diplomacy to economics and from history to everyday politics. And as a true modernist, Nehru epitomized all the values, ideals of modernism, such as Renaissance, democracy, equality, liberty, fraternity, science and technological knowledge, atheism, all these things, and so on and so forth. But at the last time, he was completely awakened to the fact that his country, India, existed at once at that point when we were moving into that freedom, independence section, that we are at this intersection of conflicting and competing views of life to converge them with accommodation and tolerance, leaving the conflicts to dialogue, debate, and engagement, resolve, and move forward. On that, he had in his mind, he recognized the concept of a mixed economy, which also stands out as an excellent manifestation of the spirit of intersectionality. He finds mixed economy as the most suitable and a practical solution to lift millions of poor and deprived humans of this country from abject poverty and deprivation to the path of self-reliance and self-sufficiency. So he was giving this fledgling nation, which was left plundered by the colonial powers, the concept of path of economic independence and inclusive growth, taking leaves of both the competing thoughts of his time, the socialist bloc and the capitalist bloc. Many critical areas of the economy were opened An economy for the private capital with solid regulatory and controlling establishments for check and balance. He strongly believed that the collective responsibility of the state and the individual to usher in a more equal society with equitable distribution of wealth and resources. And apart from that, all his contributions to non-aligned movement and all those thoughts which he had in fact thought about immediately after he had seen the World War II and everything. It was, and the world which was moving towards Cold War. Now all these things will ultimately bring him with this idea of a non-alignment movement. Now, Nehru didn't want to take any sides with any of those groupings and founded the non-alignment movement. Later turned out to be an influential group of countries who were neither aligned to the West nor the East. The grouping in a way helped about the world again falling into another kind of a catastrophe, which would have happened otherwise. And he was a man of progressive ideas who cherished the values and wisdom of the ancient Indians as expressed through the Vedas, Upanishads, or the great literary works down the ages. The proud Indian, having profound knowledge in the rich, diverse, and long tradition and cultures of his ancient land, he stood at the confluence of various streams of thoughts. So we find in Nehru complete convergence of the West and the East, the politician and the statesman, the ancient and the modern, the socialist and the democrat, pragmatist and the non-conformist, everything. He was a practitioner of democracy, not only political democracy, but also socio-economic and personal democracy. He firmly believed that ideas of middle way, tolerance, mediation, convergence, accommodation, reception, plurality, dialogue, and diplomacy finds its most appropriate expression in democracy. And any attempt to thwart and destabilize democracy is to be resisted. So this is a point where we have to think about Nehru. We have to commemorate it. And the act of remembering Nehru itself becomes a kind of a political act. The contemporary, considering the contemporary global politics discourse, which is dealing with all kinds of right wing, all the kind of neo-fascist, xenophobic ecosystems, which reminds us also more of the importance of notions of restraint, discretion, perfect balancing with openness, tolerance, dialogue, engagement, negotiations, and compromises. So this is where we have to place Nehru to commemorate the 60th death anniversary as one of the principal builders of our nation. We are trying to debate and discuss on a lot of topics about Nehru. Nehru in popular discourse, biographies of Nehru. Nehru is in the cartoons as a chronicler, as an internationalist, as a philosopher, as an institution builder, creative writer, statesman, and democrat and all. And we have a host of speakers and paper presentations which will be debating more about all these arguments. At the end of the conference, we hope that we will have a kind of a statement which will again, as I said in the beginning, which will give us a kind of perspective, which way to take, which way to move forward, which way to engage with all the things that's happening around us. Hence, I remain.
Thank you, sir. My apologies for the confusion caused. I would like to invite Mr. Aakar Patel for today's session.
Thank you. Thank you, Patel. The question is rhetorical, obviously, that none of us can possibly know what Nehru would do or even think in an India 78 years, almost 8 decades after that tryst with Destiny's speech. But we can perhaps put to ourselves the sort of problems that he might be faced with if Nehru were to come to India in January of 2025, and what is it that he would see before him, and how he would frame the problems. So, so far as I see it, there are 3 large problems that India is faced with. One is a problem on the side of the economy, and that is where I will have most of my slides. For those of you who might not be able to see the numbers, I'm very sorry, but there will be a lot of tables to follow. And so weak development, by which word is meant a general absence of wealth, a lot of poverty, a state that is small and does not have the resource to allocate at the levels which it should, was in 47 and remains in 2025, 7.5 decades later, a very serious problem, and to my mind, the largest problem. The second problem that India is faced with, this is relatively more recent, is that we have developed a nationalism that is inward facing. I think those of you who are from Kerala might not necessarily feel what it is that those of us who are not from Kerala feel. And I think that this state, to my mind, represents some of the best aspects of our nation and the best aspects of our culture. And I think it's important that we learn from this state to be able to find the answers to the second question. That India has developed a nationalism which is unlike the classical nationalisms that were there in Europe. When Hitler was seen as having a very powerful Germany, his nationalism was faced outwards, that the German nation wanted to conquer France, it wanted to conquer Poland and Czechoslovakia, it went on to invade the USSR. In India, the nationalism is essentially inward facing, that it's aimed at our own minorities. It's not aimed externally in the way that the dangerous nationalisms of Europe, including that in Germany, had. The third is, to my mind, and once again, I think this is relatively recent, this is over-centralization of the state, that you have a country the size of a continent. The number of people in India outnumber the people of, say, Western Europe. But that is divided into much more manageable, smaller states, whereas India has one very strong, powerful state of the sort Nehru wanted. We should accept that Nehru wanted. And one reason why we had partition was that Nehru did not choose an option that was before him, which was a sort of relatively decentralized center with autonomous bodies that would be in what is today Pakistan and Bangladesh. He did not want that. He wanted control of the state for two big reasons. One would be obviously the fact that he felt that India was weak and coming out of a period of the Raj should be able to and be able to present itself as a modern, strong nation. The other is that he was ideologically inclined towards doing things with the economy and the state that required him to have a great deal of control on such things, not only as the Ministry of Finance and what it could do, but also on the side of culture, as we have heard from the speakers before me. This over-centralization has led to a series of themes. So the disparity between regions in India has become more stark, given the fact that data has become available that tells us what these differences and what this chasm is. So, for instance, government data says that Tamil Nadu's per capita GDP, the goods and services that it produces every year, is 4 times that of the per capita in UP. That Karnataka's GDP per capita is 6 times the size of Bihar, 50,000 rupees a year versus 3 lakh rupees a year. That on the side of the Human Development Index, and we are in the right state to talk about this, the infant mortality rate in Madhya Pradesh is 7 times that of Kerala. The maternal mortality rate in UP is 8 times what it is in Kerala. So there's a huge difference. It's almost as if these are not part of the same region of the world. Resource allocation, despite contributing much more, so now that we have GST, we know what it is that the states contribute. Karnataka by itself sends almost as much GST to the union as UP, MP, and Bihar put together. But it receives proportionally a much smaller share of what it sends. Yet another difference, I think, and this is very true North versus South, is how we respond to majoritarianism. and to the BJP and the laws it has passed. If we look at, say, two laws, one is the criminalization of the possession of beef, which began in 2015. These are all northern states. If we look at the ban on interfaith marriage, what is called the love jihad laws, these are states that began in 2018, they're all in the north. Karnataka did dabble with it when the BJP was in power, but no more. So it seems to be a phenomenon that has divided the country in two, where the north response to Hindutva is deeper and more meaningful than the response in the south. GST is also taken away the autonomy of states to tax. So you have very large provinces. UP is 200 million people, the fifth or sixth largest country on its own, with no capacity to tax anything other than fuel and alcohol. So it is essentially an extremely centralized state with wide disparities, where the states that feel the disparity do not have control over their destiny. And of course, there is the delimitation that has been passed in law through the form of the Women's Reservation Bill. So once the census is done, we will have more seats in parliament. The problem here is twofold, and I don't think it's easy to see why one should support one side over the other. So the last delimitation happened 54 years ago, 71, when though Kerala had fewer seats than say UP, 20 Lok Sabha seats versus 84 there, the number of voters that the Kerala MP represented was the same. So it was, say, 84 crore voters in UP and 20 crore voters in Kerala. I'm citing the number as an example, not as data. What has happened since then is because of the absence of decline in fertility rates in the north, the number of people represented by the average Kerala MP is much fewer than the number of people who are represented by the MP in UP, Rajasthan, Bihar, and the rest. So there is one argument, obviously, is that the South should not be punished for making sure that its fertility rates were brought down. The other argument would be that in a real democracy, you would have the weight of one vote the same whether you were in the north or the south. I think that this is a problem that we are faced with, and we need to grapple with it in time. And here come numbers. I'm sorry, but if we look at the way in which the major Asian nations develop, there's a very clear pattern to states like Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and most recently China, that they were able to produce high double-digit growth consistently over 3 decades. This was what separated them from states that were not able to do this and remained poor, such as ours. So we remain a very poor nation. And the reason for that is that we've not been able to replicate what these states did over a period of 30 years. And the 30-year period becomes more stark when you see that in 1990, India's per capita income was the same as China's, slightly ahead, but more or less the same. But what has happened since then is that India's now gone to 1/5, very soon 1/6 of the size of China, and China seems to be moving, if not already has moved into the space that was occupied by South Korea and Taiwan and Japan before it. So we don't belong on that list, because we are where we do belong is this list. This is the per capita GDP of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and sub-Saharan Africa, that part of Africa which is under the desert regions. And if you see both the patterns of growth and the overall per capita income, we are not that different from our sisters in South Asia. Bangladesh is marginally in front of us, and I think has remained so till last year, but not by much. Pakistan is behind us, but not by much. Sub-Saharan Africa is behind us, but not by much. This is not the kind of gap that China has opened up on us. This is a much smaller gap, less than 100% difference. In most cases, 5, 10, 15, or 20%, which doesn't seem to me to be demonstrative of the fact that we are doing something different, whether you call yourself a democracy or you call yourself a military dictatorship. There is something that the South Asian nations are doing in concert, which is why it seems to me that though we have lines dividing us, the patterns of growth are the same. This figure shows two things. Firstly, it shows that India's rate of economic growth doesn't really change no matter what system the government is known by. You could call it uh, the state capturing the commanding heights of the economy. In Nehru's time, things were planned. The government would determine how many liters of paint would be produced, how many tons of steel. To what is called the license Raj in the 70s, to then the period of modernism with Rajiv Gandhi. And then we've got 34 years of what we call a liberalization. The rates of growth don't seem to change. India doubles its per capita GDP in US dollars every 12 years. And that figure, no matter what kind of economic policy is behind it, does not appear to shift very much. The other point, the minor one, is that we've had 5 years where the economy has contracted. So we could attribute some loss of momentum to COVID, but it seems to me that there's always something in the world which will slow us down. There will be some Gulf War, or some East Asian crisis, or a demonetization, or a COVID pandemic, or a Donald Trump in office, or oil at $125. Something or the other will always happen. The point is, despite all of this happening, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, South Korea, China did not slow. They absorbed the turbulence of what was happening externally and were able to push on. We don't seem to have that capacity. That when there is a problem outside, we get hit very quickly, and this has happened in the 7.5 decades 5 times. This shows the other side to where we stand. And I think on the human development index, firstly, India's numbers are made very healthy, much healthier than they would otherwise. Thanks. Because of the South. If we didn't have the southern states, the numbers would look much weaker. But even here, for those of you who can see the numbers, and I do apologize again, they show that India is not very different from South Asian nations when it comes to the development of human capital. And once again, slightly behind Bangladesh. And it's remarkable what Bangladesh has been able to do in comparison to India over the last 30 years, both in terms of economic growth. They were about 35% behind India in 2014. They've caught up and moved slightly ahead. And on human capital, they've done very well over the last 30, 40 years to move away from what was known in the West as a basket case. So I come to the question. Nehru in 2025 in Kerala in January is faced with this set of data. He's told that the problem is a lack of economic growth, India is not doing what the other successful, economically successful nation states did since the 60s, since his passing. We remain tied to the other nations in South Asia, what used to be the old undivided India, in both in terms of per capita GDP and on human development. Any rhetoric or speech or bombast about India becoming developed by 2047 is not going to happen. If the historical trend holds, and there's no reason for us to assume it will not, we will see less than a twofold doubling of where we are. So from 2,900 US dollars per capita, we might, if we are lucky, go to about 8,500. That's not going to be close to where China is today. In 2047, we will not be close to where China is today. So the problem remains. It has to be addressed in some way if we are to accept that the data is true, and there's no reason to assume it is untrue because the data comes from the government itself. The one thing Nehru would perhaps be surprised by, because he died 60 years ago in 64, is that after partition, what happened to South Asia is that it began to close itself off as a region, and we began to close off from one another, which is unusual. It goes against the trend of what has happened in the world, especially in that period. So ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, formed pretty much around the time that Nehru dies. And as we shall see, have similar hostilities to the ones that we have in South Asia, and perhaps worse. But what has happened in India is that it's pretty much impossible for people to move across from one region to another, from one country to another. I had friends who visited me from Lahore in December, and they were, the two of them were one of the 39,000 fortunate ones who got visas. But for them, they had to report to a police station every city that they came to in India, when they came and just before they were to leave. So on a 7-day visit to 3 cities, they had to make 6 visits on 6 separate days to the police stations and spend half their day there. This is true also of Indians who go to Pakistan. I've had the misfortune of having one of these visas once. And the objective of this is to make it impossible for people to travel, to discourage even families that have relatives on either side of the border, don't want to travel. The quote here is from the World Bank. It says it is 15 to 20% more expensive for an Indian company to export to Bangladesh than it is to export to Brazil, which is halfway around the world. And this is not because of the fact that Bangladesh is far away. It's because of the fact that the conditions under which goods are sent there are so difficult that companies have to add on this proportion of cost. When they sell, if they sell, there is not much trade happening on the other side of the border. With Bangladesh, it's slightly better. Half of all medical tourists who come to India come from Bangladesh. And the Indian visa regime, which the Modi government actually established, lets each patient come with 3 relatives. So it's 4 people coming in. And so that's 12 lakh people who come for medical tourism per year alone. And this has happened because the hospitals in India want it to happen. Similar things cannot be done or said by, say, the automobile industry. Neither Pakistan nor Bangladesh make their own cars, but it's not possible for Mahindra or Maruti to be able to sell to Pakistan because we don't want to trade with the enemy. If you change that mindset, you will not be able to address the essential problem, which is that you are not making most use of your geography to develop your economy and to help your people. So this is, going back to the first slide, this is where it stands. The second point on the slide is linked to the previous slide. And I think one reason why we have such hostility towards our minorities is that a large part of the poison of partition remains in the system in all the three nations and has not been properly exorcised. It's not been removed. It's that inward-facing nationalism has not been sufficiently defined. And therefore, not only do we have these close borders off with our neighbors, we focus, and to large extent, because of the fact that we have these close borders with our neighbors, all of that hostility is faced inwards. The solution I think Nehru would consider, I don't know whether he would think it to be the right one, would be to first integrate the region in a way that it was, in the way that it stood before 1947. That it is not difficult for somebody from Kottayam to get a job in Lahore, or for somebody in Lahore or in Karachi to get medical treatment in some Ayurvedic place here. It's closed now and it's impossible to do. But I think that this is something that we ought to consider. If we normalize with Bangladesh and Pakistan, do we also, to some extent, if not to a large extent, reach out to our own minorities and let go of at least some of the sentiment that is residual from 1947? And third, I think that there is an acceleration of the centripetal force that is bringing everything towards the union government. For instance, law and order is meant to be a state subject, but with the CBI and its intrusions into politics, it's more or less become the case that law and order is now a union subject for the most part on the important cases. The states can do what they want with murder, but when it comes to politics, law and order remains the preserve of the union. So, ASEAN, which was formed about 60 years ago, is composed of these states. None of them particularly big, with the exception of two of them, of Indonesia and Malaysia. And the next slide will show the those tick marks represent the problems that each of those states has with the other states. Everything that we know to be true about South Asia in terms of negativeness and enmity is true of ASEAN. Malaysia was a partition. Singapore was formed as a state. Indonesia did not want that to happen. They opposed the creation of Malaysia. Indonesia sent two terrorists, two soldiers, to bomb and kill people in Singapore. They were hanged. They were caught and hanged. And Lee Kuan Yew, the man who headed Singapore, went to Indonesia and put flowers on the graves of those two soldiers that he had had, who had been convicted of acts of terror. So there is nothing in that space that is different from what we see on. They are much more diverse. In fact, if you look at it, going from west to east, they've got Buddhists, they've got Hindus, they're ruled by communists, they're ruled under democracies, by tyrants. There's the largest Muslim majority state, Indonesia, is in ASEAN. They have set all of that to the side. The disputes remain. Those tick marks show that those are all active disputes. The disputes over borders, disputes over zones in which you can influence your military. But despite all of them, and despite the hostilities of the past, they today have trade of roughly $1 trillion. It's the fastest growing trading zone in the world. And the reason it has happened is that they have put self-interest of their people over the old hostilities of the states. The other thing they've done, and I think this is just as remarkable, is that they have normalized with China. So China occupied Vietnam for 1,000 years as a colony. Today, they have their problems on the border, on the coastline, but they trade. They haven't closed themselves off to each other. There is visa-free entry, a 30, for the most part, a 1 month visa, but each of these states offers to the others. Once again, despite large parts of the population perhaps still holding on to some of the resentments of the past. And so this is my final slide and the burden of my song. I'm saying that if the problems are as clear as they seem to be, where the numbers define the issues that South Asia has and what is holding it back from achieving, in large part, what the other states in our region and our continent have achieved. The one thing we can do, the one thing that I think Nehru would actually consider would be to step back from the way things were in 47 and trying to see if these three large states can be realigned for the benefit of their populations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is indeed an honor to have you. I invite Dr. Mukul Keshavan to moderate the session. The floor is open for discussions.
Aakar, thank you for characteristically lucid and powerful performance. I think the correct way of doing this is it is in large part a college seminar to start with questions from the audience. I know that it's traditional for first chairing seminar to put forth what he or she thinks about the talk, but I would much rather that people who wanted to ask a question or make a comment raise their hands, and I will reach out to them one by one to ask for their responses to Aakar's talk. I mean, I can only do this if you raise your hands. If you don't, I have to start asking questions which will make this a private conversation instead of a seminar. So please, are there any questions or comments that that all of you in the audience would like to make? Yes, there's a hand there. Maybe just
Unfortunately, I missed a big part of your session. I was traveling from a long distance. My question is, especially with this week's inauguration, presidential inauguration in America, we see a very, I would call it a silly kind of politics that's almost emerging. It looks like one big joke for most of the world. Like, for example, this week, Trump released a crypto meme coin, which overtook everything else and crashed the market to an extent where it feels almost surreal that this is the kind of economics that's playing out here. So when you look at the financial economic side of how the world is going to change, what role do you think something like Nehruvian socialism is going to play out? How will we be able to adapt at least some facets of what we call Nehruvian socialism into this very confusing sort of economic policies that are happening?
I think that's an excellent question, because said the surrealness of what is happening in America at this point in time, and the way in which the economies across the world respond to avoid justice by politicians. What was the question, Aakar, the sobriety of your prescriptions for what we need to do?
When the phrase Nehruvian socialism is used, it's in a very specific context, as one of the speakers elaborated on before me, which is the propensity propensity of the state to plan and to appropriate large parts of heavy industry. So that's the idea that is received. But if you were to remove the first word and look at social development, what the world is doing in the West, in response to the same impulses that Nehru had, that the CHIPS Act in the US, where the government is giving money to the private sector to set up semiconductor plants, or indeed in the 50 years before today, when the European states after the Second World War decided and then implemented a very large state that sent health and education for free in most parts of the West, would be part of what Nehru would see as the intervention by the state. And I think that he has been validated against those people who believe that the government ought not to get into things like business. Because it seems like there is no getting away from it. The other thing, I think that on social media is that India, because of its poverty, we saw the numbers. The reality is that these numbers have reduced the population where a large section is dependent on support from the state, whether that's supporting in terms of food grain or in terms of gas cylinders, or very soon to come, perhaps on data usage as well. We are living in a time of the world's history when such things are not going to be escapable. That the state will have to intervene at deeper levels as the years go, because the reality of trying to transition a 500 million people, 50 crore people out of poverty and agriculture into a meaningful middle class life is not going to be possible. Very large section of society, as is the case today, will continue to be. And finally, to the point on Trump, I think that I look forward to the next 4 years from the point of view of entertainment, if not anything else. I think the US has been disrupting the lives of people outside the US for a long time. I think it's about time that they do it to themselves. And I think they deserve a figure of this sort, who is as mercurial as he is, and as able to making money on the side as he does the point as managing the economy.
And I have another question. So I'd like to take comment on the substantive parts of Aakar's talk. If you remember, he spoke of weak economic development and inward-facing nationalism, regional disparities. If you have any questions, for example, as citizens of both India and Kerala, which occupies kind of unique position from the point of view of human development in the seas, for example, vis-a-vis the rest of India. Do you, for example, as people living in this part of India, have something to say about the way in which the issues that India faces, as Aakar points out, have to do with just the difference in experience and development of different parts of the country? Are there any questions on that, or the whole question of inward-facing nationalism, which I think is one way of talking about a kind of involuted nationalism which directs itself not to pan-Indian solidarities, but to victim shaming and to create solidarities through the creation of common enemies. Does anybody have a question about that? There's
Aakar. My question is, you have been talking about integration in a sense. That is, you have mentioned disparities between North and South, and between the minorities and the majorities, disparities between the neighboring countries. So, therefore, and as you proposed as a solution is integration, Nehruvian integration, like ASEAN. How do you distinguish this kind of integration from that of globalization, which is also advocating a kind of integration?
Not that different in the main. And I would say that we should not be closed off, as Nandi said, to the world. We should keep our windows open. But the history of the last 6 decades shows both in the European Union and in ASEAN and in Mexico that opening of borders benefits both the economies of the states which choose to do so. They are able to develop things such as supply chains, which make them globally competitive because they can. Bangladeshi workers working in a factory in Singapore, because of the kind of competence they have, could make a much more compelling product that we at the moment don't have because we don't have those workers. Globalization also tends to be about free movement of capital, and particularly capital going from one part of the world to the more powerful part of the world, the less powerful part of the world. And I don't know if that would be particularly different from what we should. What I think will happen in South Asia is inevitably this, that the closeness of the borders as they stand at the moment will not remain forever. It makes no sense. We are doing this to punish ourselves. We don't want our companies to profit by selling to a country in the neighborhood. Doesn't make sense economically. At some point, somebody will propose that this end. Whether this is done through overt policy or it's done surreptitiously, as was attempted in the late 90s under Gujarat, we don't know, but it will happen. And I think that for us to at least consider the question of whether this is possible, what its drawbacks, if any, are, cannot just lead us back to the issue of terrorism, which is where it stands. If you look at the data, there is a website called SAPP, the South Asia Terrorism Portal, that was set up by KPSK. The number of terrorism incidents outside of Jammu and Kashmir over the last 2 decades has fallen close to zero per year. If that there is a specific threat because of which we don't open up our borders to our neighbors, we should have the data to show that this threat exists. If the numbers show it doesn't, there is not really much reason to at least start a debate on this. If not implement a policy, write a policy, frame it, at least talk about it. And I hope that we can, as a nation, be able to at least talk about it.
Jack, yeah. You have questions?
Thank you for the discussion and proposition. Uh, What I feel is, we take the American history, they were adding, expanding and integrating. And also, in development also they were growing. Initially 13 colonies, then during Thomas Jefferson time, Louisiana purchased beyond Mississippi from France, then adding again from Spain, then buying Arizona, California, all those states from Mexico, then again towards west, Alaska from Russia, and now come to the proposition of adding Canada and Greenland. So they were looking for a wider integration and moving up to business from other ways. And same thing, the warring European countries came out with the European Union. And when we talk about the 1950s, South Korea, North Korea, division and war. Now the Korean youths, they want to follow those rules. And they are proposing for a united group, especially from the South Korea side. So they want to come together and develop and better their lives. But as far as India is concerned, we talk about even Bharat, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, both east and west side, we lost very. Still carrying these rules as you said, inward facing nationalism. And it is actually shrinking us more and more, and because of this mentality, leading us harming our development. On the other hand, the other nations we see, they are developing. I think this South Asian problem is also a problem in Africa, where they eventually fight and go with all the issues. So I think your proposal is aligned with other developed nations.
I think that one thing that you have to understand, but all three are sovereign states, the agency in large part remains with India. India share the border with Pakistan does not. India can reactivate and revive SARC in a way that the other states will not be able to because they face an Indian before. If you want to do what was done in ASEAN or what was done to in the EU, we have to ask ourselves this one question: what is the benefit of closing off our borders? And the one benefit is that it stops acts of terror from happening across India. Where is the data to show that they are happening? The response to it cannot be a hypothetical. It says that if we do this, something really bad is going to happen. We have to weigh what will and will not happen in the widest sense possible and not close off arguments by just pointing to that.
I just also want to say that, as you pointed out, trade can happen legally or it can happen surreptitiously. And one of the things that we've seen, which is in fact contributed to violence in the Northeast, is that there's an enormous smuggling trade across our Northeastern borders. And this is trade in minerals, in wood, in drugs, in all kinds of commodities. And it's trade that is so blatant, it's virtually open, except that it's illegal. And the Indian state has been talking about look east policy for at least 10 years now. So it's not as if the state does not acknowledge the benefits of integration, at least eastwards. I mean, Pakistan remains in its mind kind of zero-sum situation in the West. But the state recognizes that it would be economically beneficial, strategically beneficial for India to look east. But nothing has actually happened because of the domestic politics of the country. The sense in which, because the Northeast is fractured increasingly, especially Manipur, the rationality of this trade is always distorted through this sort of shattered prism of local country. So I think as Aakar says, the case for integration is self-evident, but the ability of the Indian state to overcome or transcend local division to make the rational choice remains sort of limited. I just want to ask a question though about, when you talk about integration, when you talk about an inward-facing nationalism, when you talk about a rational weighing of risk and reward, vis-a-vis terrorism and the rewards of economic integration, the elephant in the room basically is that all South Asian states, whether it's Pakistan or whether it's Myanmar or whether it's Sri Lanka or indeed India, are essentially majoritarian states. These are states where the engine of politics over the past 10 or 15 or 20 years has in fact been the mobilization of a nominal demographic majority into a self-aware, hostile demographic majority. And this seems to me to be so central to the politics of all these countries that to actually look at the rationality of doing something in the material sphere, such as trade, economic integration, etc., without addressing the fact that it's almost an existential necessity for the most powerful political actors in these countries to mobilize people in ways that are rational from the point of view of winning seats in democratic politics, but utterly irrational in terms of economic progress. How do you get through the majoritarian war into the sunlit fields of economic rationality?
Firstly, it's a self-evident that what you say is true, that whether it is through law, as in the case in Pakistan by law, no non-Muslim can become the prime minister, or whether it is through practice. In India, it is inconceivable to us that we can have a Muslim who is also elected as the leader of the country. Bangladesh, though it opened its contribution around it's used secular state in our and I don't mean secular in the sense of its practice, but in the sense of law. That at a point in time in India, when we've not had a Muslim Indian cabinet, Bangladesh was the one that had its largest minority represented. And we've not had one more. Democratic politics rewards majoritarianism in our part of the world. This is a fact. The fact is that the two parties who produce the same lack of development, as I think the numbers show us, will differ in terms of popularity if one of them clings on to something which is based on identity only. It's absolutely true that this is the problem that we face, not just in India, also in Bangladesh. How do we overcome it? I think we need to negotiate that figure. I'm not one given to the great man theory of history, but I think that we need to be able to find somebody convincing who says to us that it is for our benefit, for our demonstrable benefit that we normalize. And I think that word is used excessively, but what it means is try not to be insane, try to be, and that's what we've done to us. To punish companies in India because you don't want them to sell goods to Pakistan is not, it tests the limits of sanity. We need somebody convincing in popular politics, at least in one of these countries, in this country, I should say, who can talk to the population and say that this is what we've been doing since 47. Can we look at another way of looking at our region? The really weird thing is, this is also what the other side wants. Aids for an Akhand Bharat, the unified India. They don't know how it is that they can achieve it. You could argue, and I think rightly so, that what they want is what they crave is the land and not the people. But if they say that, and they do say, the map in Parliament that we put up a couple of years ago says that we hold on to an identity of India which is wider than just the narrow borders post 47 define it as being. If you want it, you need to work towards it. You need to let go of some of the things that we've been holding on to, which is the only way, in my mind, that it can happen.
Other questions? Yes. Yes, please. Hello, sir. So I have no problem in calling Nehru a romantic. But my question is Aakar Patel a romantic? No, because around 2000, I remember BBC selecting Rudyard Kipling's If as the greatest poem. But can you place If in today's context and call it a great poem? So my question is, if you contextualize Nehru in 2024-25, what would be the two most dramatic decisions that Nehru would be making? Want to have a crack at it as well? So I would say that Nehru was formed in the crucible of the 3 decades before 47. So any ideas that he had about state, about people, about politics were formed under British rule. He is essentially a product of the British system, which assumed that parliament is supreme, that there's a particular way in which politics is to be conducted, which is not the way that India matured as a democracy into. So the institutions that formed him and the ones that he built are not necessarily the same as we have today. He was by nature inclusive. If you look at some of his biographies, there's one by Walter Crocker, which says that he spent 3 hours with a high school delegation that had come from Melbourne while his cabinet waited outside. He was not the sort, once at the Republic Day parade, some ministers were angry that they had not been given chairs to sit on. So Nehru got off his chair and sat on the grass so that they would not feel offended at doing the same thing. He was that kind of person. Can that sort of person leading by example as he did be able to make a dent in popular politics only if they held power? I think it has become difficult for the Congress or for other parties in the north to displace majoritarianism because, as Mukul believes, and I think his belief is true, that there is something magnetic and appealing about the idea of Hindutva, particularly in northern India, about the idea of Islamism in Pakistan, about the idea of bullying the minority Hindus in Bangladesh. There is something appealing, and there are people willing to deploy it. We are fortunate that for many years after 47, the parties in power chose not to actively deploy it. The two things I would see Nehru as doing uh, in our time, were he to appear, I think first would be to give us an honest assessment of where we stand. I don't think that's happening today. That the leadership in India talks about greatness in the near distant future, which is um, either imminent if it has not already arrived. I think that is lying to us. I suspect he would at least be able to look at what he has wrought and what has been brought after him with with an honest eye. The other thing I think that he would look at would be the world. That he was always interested, and once again, this is from Crocker that he found him once looking at an atlas of of a map of the world on the wall, looking at which parts, because India had inherited a very small diplomatic office. The MEA, as we know it, is the creation of Nehru. That he would see how it is that India could better engage with the world, including its neighbors, in a way that I don't think we have the sensibility to do at the moment. He understood the world and its leadership at a level where the history texts tell us that there was a response from the other side, whether in Africa or Southeast Asia or in Europe and the US, where there was admiration for the man and what he stood for, a sort of humanity that went beyond his nation. These are the two things I think.
Just to supplement this, I think if in response to your question about what an updated Nehru in 2025 might say is that he might start by admitting to the things he got wrong. That, one of the things that Nehru was perfectly positioned to do that other contemporaries of his in post-colonial Asian countries did was universal primary education. We had mentioned earlier today Nehru's achievements in the field of higher education and the IITs and so on. It could be equally well argued that these achievements were bought at the cost of universal primary education. I mean, Kerala is an example of a state that doesn't follow the Indian rule. Kerala, in that way, is much more like Sri Lanka, in the sense that both are equivalently sized areas that actually invested in primary education and created the potential of an educated, skilled working class to deal with the challenges of a modern capitalist economy. I think Nehru would probably admit that he got that grotesquely wrong, that the fact that he did not invest in universal primary education didn't just mean that Indians weren't literate, it meant also that India was not up to the challenge of capitalist development, was not up to the challenge of being a destination for investment. And I think following on from this, he might admit that the way to address majoritarianism is not by banging on about secularism or pluralism, but actually demonstrating that a large poor country can in some equitable way work towards the welfare of all its people. And which is not to say that Nehru didn't try, which is not to say that we aren't saying this with hindsight, we are. But I think what Aakar said about the challenge of weak development and regional inequalities is one of Nehru's legacies. It's one of the less sort of savory parts of his legacy. But to the extent that we compliment him with 17 years of extraordinary stability, inclusiveness, a pluralist democratic culture, he must also, in a sense, bear the responsibility uh, for a state that I think we saw in Aakar's tables, where India, China, South Korea, how they line up in the 50s and 60s, and where we end up. And I think he would be man enough to recognize that he got the materialist challenge perhaps wrong. Are there? Yes, please. Yes. And then this gentleman. No, first there and then here.
Thank you, sir. Actually, when talking about the integration, we do have some insecurities with the regional countries. Any country with sharing borders with other countries will have the insecurities. So, irrespective of all this, I do support integration. But what are the measures that we can take when we are going through integration? Because I do believe that India has all the power to become either as an industrial power, technological power, or anything. We have natural resources, we have workforce, labor force, we have intellectuals, everything we have. But still, all these years, we all what we have been a meal in others' plate. Means we are always being the kingmakers, but never been able to be the king. Our resources is always being helpful for other nations. Even in India, everyone wants to work in foreign countries than in India. We are not supporting our companies, Indian companies. We are always wanting the foreign companies. Uh, we discussed that China was able to grow its GDP because it follows a kind of nationalism that supports its economic growth. They have their own own apps, they have their own industries, but India failed to do that. We are always depending on either technology, the apps, or everything from the foreign nations. So what I mean is, we look at nationalism in a wrong way. We don't want India to grow as an economic nation. Rather, we want as a nationalism. We want India to grow as religious nation. So, in this situation, what are the measures that India can take, or what are the changes in system that India can make to grow as an economic power? And especially with the present tax system, the national government is opting. Do we have any hope of becoming an economic power?
There are many routes available. If you look at the European Union, after the Second World War, what they did first was to integrate their steel and coal industries. And this was to ensure that France and Germany did not mobilize for war without the other knowing. Because steel and coal industries in the 50s are integrated as part of one economic system, it becomes difficult for one of those two countries to be able to mass manufacture weaponry without the other knowing. And it began as modestly as that. And I think, to my mind, the route that you take towards integration is less important than the intent. If there is clarity on the fact that we need to normalize between the states, we need to open up ourselves in the way that India is open to Nepal. So we have a pretty good relationship with Nepal on paper. We tend to screw it up every so often. But what happens is that the Indian citizens and Nepali citizens can work in one another's countries and come without visas. I see no reason why we can't duplicate that with the rest of South Asia's nations. It is true that Nepali citizens can't buy property here and vice versa. But that is a matter of detail. The way in which this happens, the way in which it unfolds, can happen sequentially and can begin modestly. So the second point, I think one reason why China has become so successful is that its economy competes externally. Its companies compete with other companies across the world, whereas India is much more closed off. And if you count on the fingers of one hand the number of Indian companies that sell products to consumers abroad, I don't think you will reach number five. It's not that the bulk of the economy, the largest companies in India trade within India, and they are to some extent rent seeking, in the sense that they extract from the state either licenses for mining or for spectrum, which is what is used. That's not the same with China. China's companies, whether they're making shoelaces or cars, are competing with companies across the world, which is why they're able to dominate manufacturing to the extent that they have. But one lesson we can learn from them, and there are many lessons that they can learn from us. I think our openness in terms of democratic institutions, social reform, and things like that are things that China can learn from us. One thing we can learn from them is how it is that you set aside the tensions of the border, knowing that they exist, knowing that they are real, develop some kind of coherent policy that benefits your own people. And by that I mean economically benefit. I think if we could learn that from what China has done over the last 40 years, I think it would be a great.
Salam, namaste, sir. I myself Shaheen. So you had first talked about reaching out to the minorities, reaching out to Pakistan and Bangladesh and normalizing the trade ties with them. And later on about the inward-looking nationalism, which unfortunately is also a Savarna nationalism, which excludes a large sections of the people in India, as well as the minorities, and also certain parts of India, which has led to, recent developments of Dravidian nationalism and regional nationalism, the Bengali nationalism, and the Khalistani movement, so on and so forth. And Nehru actually believed in the course of development, this sort of Brahminic elitism would fade away, which actually did not happen. So how would have Nehru tackled, if he existed today, towards the post-Hindutva India, by tackling this regional nationalism and also this Savarna nationalism, which is very exclusionary and centered in a particular part of the country?
So to my mind, he was disinterested in issues of that type. That I think the Congress had pretty much outsourced all of its social thinking to Gandhi, and whatever was published on the papers of Amarijan and the other newspapers that he brought out tended to go for policy. In fact, even in the Constituent Assembly and in the Constitution, we've got Brahminical Gandhian thought, whether it is surreptitiously inserted on the issue of a prohibition is actually a Sanskritic act, and so is a cow slaughter 48. It comes not because of the fact that the Muslims in the Constituent Assembly stand up and say, we recognize that this is an issue for you which is delicate. If you want to ban it, ban it. What they say is, don't do it under the pretense of economy. That what had happened in the debate is that Congressman stood up and said that India is a malnourished country, children need milk, India doesn't produce enough milk, we can't slaughter cows, therefore we need cows. It wasn't that we believe that the cow is worthy of worship and should not be killed. That's not the reason. All the cow slaughter laws that have been passed in India, none of them refer to Hindu sentiment as being the reason. There is a Supreme Court judgment from the 50s delivered by the Chief Justice, I think his name is Abhiranjan Sen, where he admits to the fact that case is a Qureshi versus a state of Bihar. That Article 19 says that Indians have the right to freely practice any occupation or a profession. The butchers went to the court to say, if that is the case, why are we being stopped from selling the meat that we want to? And the Supreme Court, Sudhir Ranjan Das is the name of the Chief Justice, said that I recognize that we cannot introduce religion into law, but in this instance, I fear we will have to. We cannot discount Hindu sentiment. Nehru, because he had outsourced this, was okay with this sitting in the constitution. I don't think he believed that it would cause trouble later on, which it did. Anything that you will introduce from that sentiment, there was no reason for India to have brought in alcohol into the constitution except for the fact that Gandhi wanted. Also, I think his understanding of the Indian social spectrum was limited by his being more anglicized than Gandhi was, more anglicized than Ambedkar was. and similar to Jinnah in the sense that he didn't really grasp the essence of politics in the social domain. So Jinnah, when he gives his famous speech in August 1947, tells his people that the three most important problems that Pakistan is faced with are nepotism, black, black money, black market, and jobbery. These are the three things. I mean, none of these turned out to be the real problems, but he didn't know because he wasn't plugged into society in the way that Gandhi was and in the way that Ambedkar was forced to be. And I think that's similar for Nehru as well, that he might not have recognized this wave that has come from the north from after 1989.
So we actually have a few questions from our online attendees. First one goes, as for your argument of economic integration, SAARC is already there for regional cooperation. Maybe it is not effective, but how would Nehru respond to Hindutva today in relation to India's economy today?
He would be, I think he would be on the front foot when it came to Hindutva. The issue is whether that would mean that he would get any traction. The Nehru of 47 is not the Nehru of 2025. That there is a national movement of the sort that was bigger than what none of Gandhi's movements leading up to 47, whether it is in 2021, 22, Jallianwala Bagh, none of them mobilized as many people as the Ram Janmabhoomi movement did. Not even one. None of them mobilized as many people as the CAA movement did across India in 2020. His movements were limited. Dandi March, handful of people walking, and the salt tax didn't go. So it's because they were the focal point of opposition to the Raj, they had a sort of a stature there, but they hadn't faced the kind of rhetoric and the kind of action that the BJP was willing to take in 1989 once they discovered that this leads to vote. So the vote share of the BJP till 1990 only affords it partnerships in state. The first chief minister of the BJP to get a full majority in 1990. Till then, nationally, they only have a single-digit vote share. So Advani then doubles it, and then Modi comes and doubles it again. So it goes from 9 to 18 and from 18 to 36. How does Nehru combat that? I don't know. There has to be a message which is honest and which is open. But in a part of the world where emotion has taken hold so strongly, does that kind of message work? I don't know.
So that's one more question.
Sir, I don't know whether I'm crossing the limit of the seminar, but I just wanted to know, even though we are still remaining secular in words, we know that in the current situation of India, we are not like that. And I just wanted to know whether we have a chance to go back to the Nehruian legacy of secularism, which he designed to us.
I think we do. I think the natural state of India is not one of hostility. That if you walk out onto the street, you do not find a reflection of what the news channels are saying. We don't hate each other. We're not at each other's throat. The problem is when the state top-down instigates through law and through policy, through exclusion and through rhetoric, the kind of violence we are seeing. How does that end? It just ends by the state stopping doing it. It will go back to normalcy. We cannot survive as a nation with a population of this size. China's Muslim population is 1%. All of the Chinese Muslims, Uyghur, etc. India has 200 million Muslims. We cannot, the Weimar Republic in Germany in the 30s, less than 1% of the total population was Jewish. You cannot replicate, no matter how hard you try, what was done in other countries in extreme fashion in this one. It's not possible. Recognizing that, how do you move to a state where the policies you hold, what the state does benefits you. The first step, I think, is for the government, the state, the prime minister, and the leadership to stop doing what they're doing in the negative sense. You might have a disagreement with them on economic policy, on ceremonial things, but I think on the issue of attacking your own population, large parts of it, there should be unanimity that the only way to move on from this, the only way to become sane and normal again is for it to first stop.
So, Nehru was the man who introduced the term scientific temperament into Indian Constitution. And then what would be the status of science in a post-Hindutva India?
I think the problems are manifest that you've got institutions of higher learning that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, but I think that's a very small part of it. I think that tends to generate much more interest than it should. The institutions he left behind have done to large extent. Mukul mentioned some of them. The Sahitya Academy, the NID are some of the others, which have done to this nation, which have brought to this nation things that it lacked before they were introduced by him. The one issue I think that he would have seen is that fundamental science today is not big in India, that it's all derived, and a lot of the national energy in terms of the college population tends to be on things that he would not have fully grasped, including computer science.
Yes, so there's one. Jawaharlal Nehru's vision for India's progress led to the establishment of premier institutes like IITs and AIIMS, which have contributed immensely to higher education. However, some argue that primary education did not receive comparable attention during his tenure. What do you think were the factors behind this prioritization, and how do you assess its long-term impact on India's education system?
So Mukul referred to this. The idea that Nehru had was that focus of the union of the center should be on institutions of higher learning. And was that the right focus at that point in time? The argument that could be made is that, well, because it's a subject that rests both with the state and center, primary education is something that the states ought to do. The union will take care of the heavy lifting when it comes to institution building. Does that also reflect itself in resource allocation? I don't think it did. That we had then and we continue to have now a much smaller share in terms of what schooling receives than it should with health. Is he specifically to blame for the fact that India's primary education system is not as good as it is universally as it is in Kerala? I don't think so. I think if it were possible for Kerala to develop it at the level which it did, it was theoretically possible for Gujarat to develop it. The fact that we did not, we can't be blamed on Nehru. That something else was going on in these states, which sort of ensured that we didn't have the quality that we did in our school. You want that?
No, I don't have anything to say on this. Any other questions? Yes, well, you've had a question, so can we just get someone who hasn't asked a question yet? Anyone? Okay, sorry, I'm told that we have gone over the time that we had for this. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you for giving us the privilege of interacting with you. I leave Aakar with the last one.
Thank you very much, Mukul. Thank you to all of you. This was a very nice session for me. And as I said at the beginning, this is a state that I really enjoy coming to. This is a state that a lot of us outside of Kerala can learn much from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aakar Patel and Dr. Mukul Keshan. I would like to invite Dr. Suma Alexander to give away the memento to Dr. Aakar Patel as a token of appreciation and gratitude. I invite Lakshmi J for the vote of thanks.
As Jawaharlal Nehru rightly said, time is not measured by the passing of years, but by what one does, what one feels, and what one achieves. Good afternoon to all respected dignitaries, principal, vice principal, teachers, non-teaching staffs, students, well-wishers, and all others gathered here from various departments and from various institutions. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today for this conference. We are thrilled to have you all here and are grateful for your support and participation. Today, I take this opportunity to express my deepest sense of gratitude and appreciation to all those who made this event such a resounding success. First and foremost, on behalf of the Department of English of Vishamu College, Mavelikara, and all the students, I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Mr. Aakar Patel, journalist, author, editor, and chair of Amnesty International in India, who spared time from his busiest schedule to grace this occasion. Your presence, deliberations, has truly enriched our experience. Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights on the topic, what would Nehru do? Options for a post-Hindutva in India. We are deeply inspired by your talk, sir. Your words were valuable and thought-provoking. Your talk guided us to understand those three major problems that our country undergoes now. We know that Jawaharlal Nehru's vision and legacy continue to endure because he was a true model of modernity. Your explanations helped us to realize that India with Nehru versus India without Nehru. His higher education, higher industry. Nehru was a real one, and he was not only a man of vision, but also a man of action. The one solution that Nehru prescribes in such a case would be regional integration. Thank you, sir. We learned a lot from your words. Your valuable words will always stay with us. Special thanks to our moderator, Dr. Mukul Keshavan, author and former associate professor, Department of History and Culture, Jamia Millia Islamia, and columnist, The Guardian. Thank you, sir. I would also like to extend my thanks to our principal, vice principal, head of the English department, and faculty for their valuable contribution, guidance, and encouragement in all our efforts. Thank you. I would like to recognize the conference organizers, Mr. Premjit and Mr. Rami David, for their outstanding efforts in creating a program that is both informative and engaging. Thank you, sirs. Now, I would like to thank the heads and faculty and students from various departments who collaborated with us on this project. Thank you all. Now, I would like to thank. We are grateful for the presence of students, teachers, and researchers from various institutions who have joined us to learn and explore new ideas. Thank you all. It's my pleasure to extend our token of appreciation to all invited guests who came over here to bless this occasion. Thank you all. I would like to thank the people who are working behind the scenes. Special word of thanks to all of the staff, supporting staff, technical team, media team, event management team, sponsors, and all. Thank you all for your great help and support. Let me take this opportunity to express my appreciation to everyone who played a role in making this occasion a grand success. Your collective efforts have made a significant impact, and we are grateful for your involvement. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi. With that, we break for lunch. Food has been arranged in the auditorium. Our student volunteers will guide you there. After lunch, we'll reconvene.